January 3, 2026. Pre-dawn, Caracas, Venezuela. A clandestine U.S. operation, codename Absolute Resolve, culminates in a single moment. The capture of President Nicolas Maduro from the presidential palace. One man, one night, one operation, and beneath it all, 300 billion barrels of oil. Here's the paradox. Venezuela has more proven oil reserves than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than anyone on earth. And yet it produces less oil than Ecuador. It has the wealth of nations buried in its soil, and its people are starving. How does that happen? Simple. The oil isn't the prize. Control of the oil is the prize. And for the past 25 years, Venezuela's oil has been locked away, sanctioned, stranded, untouchable, a multi-trillion-dollar asset frozen in place, until now. Because that single capture? It just unlocked the vault. And what's about to happen next isn't just geopolitics. It's the opening move in a decade-long game to reshape global energy markets. Let me show you the playbook. The four-stage pattern of resource control. This isn't the first time this has happened. When a nation sits on resources too valuable to leave alone and too strategic to ignore, a pattern emerges. 4 stages, executed across decades, refined through repetition. Stage 1, isolation. Cut the target off from global markets. Sanctions, embargoes, diplomatic pressure, make them weak, make them desperate. Stage 2, destabilization, internal collapse, political chaos, economic ruin. Let the country tear itself apart from within. Stage 3, intervention, a capture, a coup, a liberation. The moment when external forces step in to restore order. Stage 4, extraction. Rebuild the infrastructure. Install friendly leadership. Open the resource flows, on your terms, to your allies, under your control. This pattern has played out before. Iran, 1953. Iraq, 2003. Libya, 2011. And now, Venezuela, 2026. The details change. The justifications vary. The methods evolve. But the structure remains identical. Let me walk you through it. Stage 1. Isolation. The stranglehold. The wealth beneath first. Understand what we're talking about. Venezuela, 300 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. To put that in perspective, Saudi Arabia, 267 billion barrels. Canada, 168 billion barrels. Iran, 157 billion barrels. Iraq, 145 billion barrels. Venezuela has more than any of them. In the 1990s, PDVSA, Venezuela's state oil company, was a global powerhouse, producing over 3 million barrels per day, exporting to the US, Europe, Asia. Venezuela was rich, not just oil rich, functioning rich. Then came Hugo Chavez, nationalization, expropriation of foreign assets, Exxon, ConocoPhillips, kicked out, and the United States responded with Stage 1, isolation. The sanctions regime 2015, Executive Order 13,692. Obama declares Venezuela a national security threat. 2017, Trump escalates. Sanctions on PDVSA, sanctions on Venezuelan bonds, sanctions on gold sales. 2019, full oil embargo. No U.S. company can buy Venezuelan oil. No U.S. bank can finance Venezuelan transactions. The goal wasn't to punish Maduro. The goal was to strangle the revenue stream, cut off 95% of Venezuela's export income, collapse the economy, create conditions for regime change. The historical pattern. Iran, 1953. This isn't new. In 1951, Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Britain's response? Stage 1, isolation, naval blockade, oil embargo, international pressure. Iran's oil exports dropped to nearly zero. The economy collapsed. Mossadegh's government weakened, setting the stage for what came next. The effect. By 2020, Venezuela's oil production had collapsed to under 500,000 barrels per day, an 85% decline. Critical infrastructure, pipelines, refineries, drilling rigs left to rust. Technical expertise fled the country. Maintenance stopped. The oil was still there, all 300 billion barrels, but it was effectively removed from global markets, stranded, and that's exactly the point of Stage 1. Make the resource inaccessible. Wait for internal collapse, then move to Stage 2. Stage 2, destabilization, the collapse, economic implosion. With oil revenues cut off, Venezuela entered freefall. Hyperinflation, 10 million% at its peak in 2019. Currency collapse, food shortages, medicine shortages, GDP contracted by 75% between 2013 and 2020. 7 million people, nearly a quarter of the population, fled the country. This wasn't an accident. This was the designed outcome of Stage 1. Sanctions don't just punish governments, they devastate populations. And when populations are desperate, governments become unstable. Political chaos 2019. The U.S. recognizes Juan Guaido as interim president of Venezuela, not elected, not in power, but recognized by over 50 countries as the legitimate leader. Meanwhile, Maduro remains in Caracas, backed by the military, by Russia, by China. Two presidents, two claims to legitimacy, political paralysis. This is stage 2. Create conditions where intervention becomes necessary. The historical pattern. Iraq, 1990 to 2003. After the Gulf War in 1991, the U.S. imposed sanctions on Iraq for 12 years, oil for food programs, no-fly zones, weapons inspections. The sanctions didn't remove Saddam Hussein, but they devastated Iraq's infrastructure. By 2003, Iraq's oil production had fallen by 60%. Refineries were decrepit, hospitals were collapsing, and when the U.S. invaded in 2003, the justification was humanitarian and security-based. But the outcome? Control of 145 billion barrels of oil, Venezuela's collapse. By 2025, Venezuela was a failed state in all but name. Electricity blackouts, water shortages, gasoline rationing in a country with the world's largest oil reserves, the government barely functioning, the opposition in exile, the population exhausted, and the oil still buried underground, inaccessible, worthless to the people sitting on top of it. Stage 2 complete. Time for Stage 3. Stage 3. Intervention, the capture. January 3rd, 2026, pre-dawn. U.S. Special Operations Forces enter Caracas. Operation Absolute Resolve. The target? Nicolas Maduro, extracted from the presidential palace, flown to the United States, arrested, charges, narco-terrorism, corruption, crimes against humanity. The U.S. government statement, restoring democracy, protecting human rights, enabling humanitarian aid. But here's what they don't say. This is Stage 3, the intervention that unlocks the resource. The legal vacuum international law experts were immediate in their assessment. This is a violation of Venezuelan sovereignty, a breach of the UN Charter, an illegal kidnapping of a head of state, Chatham House, the Council on Foreign Relations, international legal scholars, all saying the same thing. But here's the thing about international law. It's only enforceable if someone enforces it. The UN Security Council? Russia and China would veto any resolution. The International Criminal Court? The U.S. doesn't recognize its jurisdiction, so the operation proceeds and the world watches. The historical pattern. Libya, 2011. In 2011, NATO intervened in Libya, ostensibly to protect civilians during the Arab Spring. The outcome, Muammar Gaddafi captured and killed, the government overthrown. Libya had 48 billion barrels of oil reserves, high quality, easy to refine crude. Before the intervention, Libya was producing 1.6 million barrels per day. After, chaos, civil war, fractured control. But here's what happened to the oil concessions. Western companies, Eni, Total, Repsol, moved in. New contracts, new terms, new control. The intervention wasn't about Gaddafi. It was about resetting the terms of resource access. Venezuela's liberation. Within 48 hours of Maduro's capture, the U.S. announces immediate lifting of oil sanctions, $100 billion infrastructure investment plan. American firms to lead reconstruction, new elections within 18 months. The message is clear. Venezuela is open for business, but on whose terms? Stage 3 complete. Now comes the extraction. Stage 4, extraction, the gold rush, Chevron's position. Here's where it gets interesting. While ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips abandoned Venezuela years ago, one company stayed, Chevron, operating under a special Treasury Department license, maintaining relationships, keeping infrastructure minimally functional. Why? Because Chevron understood the long game. They knew sanctions wouldn't last forever. They knew intervention would eventually come, and when it did, they'd be the only major American oil company still on the ground. First mover advantage. By January 5, 2026, 2 days after the capture, Chevron announces $15 billion investment commitment, plans to rehabilitate the Orinoco Belt, the world's largest heavy oil deposit. Target, restore production to 2 million barrels per day within 5 years. The Guyana Blueprint. To understand the scale of what's possible, look at Guyana. 2015, zero oil production, a blank slate. ExxonMobil discovers the Liza field, over 11 billion barrels offshore. By 2025, Guyana is producing 600,000 barrels per day, on track for 1.3 million by 2027, a nation transformed in under a decade. Total investment, approximately $30 billion. Return on investment, extraordinary. Exxon's profit margin in Guyana exceeds 40%. Now scale that up. Venezuela has 300 billion barrels, 27 times Guyana's reserves. If even a fraction of that potential is unlocked, we're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity, the largest oil development project in modern history. The historical pattern: Iraq, 2003 to 2010. After the 2003 invasion, Iraq's oil sector was open to international bidding. ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, Total, Chevron, they all moved in. Production doubled from 2 million barrels per day in 2003 to over 4 million by 2015. Who benefited? Not primarily the Iraqi people. The contracts were structured as service agreements, fixed fees per barrel produced. The oil companies got stability, access, and profit. Iraq got some revenue and ongoing instability, but the resource was extracted. On Western terms, the new architecture. Here's how Venezuela's reconstruction will work. Phase 1, years 1 to 3. Infrastructure repair. Rebuild refineries, $20 billion. Restore pipelines, $10 billion. Upgrade export terminals, $5 billion. Phase 2, years 3 to 7. Production expansion. Rehabilitate existing fields, $30 billion. Develop new projects in the Orinoco Belt, $40 billion. Phase 3, years 7 to 10. Full integration, 2 to 3 million barrels per day production. Direct pipeline to U.S. Gulf Coast refineries Venezuela as stable, Western-aligned supplier. Total investment required, $100 to $150 billion. Total potential value: if oil averages $70 per barrel, that's $50 to $75 billion in annual revenue at full production. Return on investment, 7 to 10 years, then pure profit. Who gets the resource? This is the key question. The Venezuelan people sit on 300 billion barrels of oil, but who controls it? The new government, installed with U.S. backing, will sign contracts with American firms. Production sharing agreements, service contracts, joint ventures. The legal structure will ensure that the majority of revenue flows to the companies doing the extraction. Venezuela gets some royalties, some taxes, some employment, but the strategic control, the profit margins, the long-term value, that goes to Chevron, to ExxonMobil, to ConocoPhillips, to whoever wins the contracts. This is stage 4. The resource is accessed, but the value is extracted by those who control the infrastructure. The geopolitical chessboard. OPEC's nightmare. For decades, OPEC, led by Saudi Arabia, has controlled global oil prices through production quotas. Pump less, prices rise; pump more, prices fall. It's a cartel, and it works because they control enough supply to set the market. But what happens when 2 to 3 million barrels per day of Venezuelan oil comes online? That's OPEC's worst-case scenario. It dilutes their control, adds a major non-OPEC supplier in the Western Hemisphere, gives the U.S. a reliable, geographically close source of heavy crude. Saudi Arabia is already signaling concern, talking about maintaining market stability. Translation: we're about to lose our pricing power. Russia and China locked out. For the past decade, Russia and China have been Venezuela's primary backers. Russia, military support; oil technology, political cover; China, $60 billion in loans for oil deals. Maduro's capture just locked them both out. Those Chinese loans? Likely unrecoverable. Russian oil partnerships? Terminated. This isn't just about oil economics. It's about great power competition. The U.S. just evicted Russia and China from Latin America's most strategic resource. The energy security angle: U.S. Gulf Coast refineries are specifically designed to process heavy, sour crude. That's what Venezuela produces. For years, they've been importing that crude from Canada, Mexico, and, prior to sanctions, Venezuela. Bringing Venezuelan crude back online solves a specific problem. It feeds refineries optimized for that exact type of oil. This isn't just about supply, it's about specific supply that maximizes specific refinery profits. The companies that own those refineries, Chevron, ExxonMobil, Marathon, Valero, they're not just oil producers, they're the downstream processors, vertical integration, control from wellhead to gas station. The risks: political instability. Within hours of Maduro's capture, Venezuela's foreign minister declared, "Nicolás Maduro remains the legitimate president." This isn't over. There's still significant support for Chavismo in Venezuela: the military, the rural base, the urban poor. Installing a U.S.-backed government doesn't guarantee stability. Libya proved that. Iraq proved that. You can remove the leader. But if you don't win the population, you get insurgency, sabotage, ongoing conflict. An oil infrastructure is extremely vulnerable to attack. The $100 billion question: rebuilding Venezuela's oil sector requires massive capital investment. Where does it come from? Private companies will demand guarantees, insurance, legal protections. But Venezuela's legal system is weak, its institutions are corrupt, its political future uncertain. Investing $100 billion into a potentially unstable country is an enormous risk. Returns could be extraordinary, but so could losses. The international backlash. The UN General Assembly has already condemned the operation. Russia, China, Iran, and dozens of other nations are calling it illegal. There are talks of sanctions against the U.S. diplomatic isolation, trade retaliation. If the operation fails to stabilize Venezuela quickly, the U.S. faces a prolonged quagmire, military presence, ongoing costs, international condemnation, and if the oil doesn't flow, the whole justification collapses. What this means for you. Oil prices. Short term, minimal impact. Markets are well supplied, OPEC can adjust. Medium term, 3 to 5 years. If Venezuela reaches 1 to 2 million barrels per day, expect downward pressure on prices. Maybe $5 to $10 per barrel lower than otherwise. Long term, 7 to 10 years. If Venezuela hits 3 million barrels per day, oil prices could stabilize in the $50 to $70 range permanently. Lower gas prices, lower heating costs, lower transportation costs, but that assumes everything goes right, which it rarely does. Energy stocks. If you're in the market, watch. Winners. Chevron. Direct exposure, first mover advantage. Halliburton, Schlumberger, oilfield services for reconstruction. U.S. Gulf Coast refiners, access to heavy crude supply. Losers, OPEC producers, loss of pricing power. Russian oil companies, lost contracts. Canadian oil sands, competition for U.S. heavy crude market. Geopolitical exposure. If you're in energy, defense, or international trade, this matters. Venezuela is now a flashpoint. Great power competition, resource control, potential for escalation. Conflicts in resource-rich regions have a way of spreading. Plan accordingly. Final revelation. Here's what they don't teach you in economics class. Resources don't belong to whoever sits on them. Resources belong to whoever can extract them, and extraction requires capital technology, military force, political control. Venezuela's people sit on 300 billion barrels of oil, but they don't have the capital to develop it. They don't have the technology to refine it. They don't have the military power to protect it. And as of January 3rd, 2026, they don't have the political control over it. So who owns Venezuela's oil? Not Venezuela. The same pattern over and over. Iran, 1953. Guatemala, 1954. Indonesia, 1965. Chile, 1973. Iraq, 2003. Libya, 2011. And now Venezuela, 2026. 4 stages, executed with precision. Isolate, destabilize, intervene, extract. The details change. The justifications evolve. The methods become more sophisticated. But the structure is always the same. And here's the uncomfortable truth. It works. Not for the people sitting on the resources. They rarely benefit. But for those who control the extraction, it's extraordinarily profitable. 300 billion barrels of oil just came into play. Not because of market forces, not because of democracy, not because of freedom, because one man was captured in a pre-dawn raid, and the decade-long race to extract that wealth has begun. The oil was always there. The only question was, who would control it? Now we know.